Good afternoon. You are muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
I can. How's everything?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Are you ready to do a quick check-in?
Sure.
Okay, awesome. So, are you able to see me and hear me clearly?
I am.
Sounds good. And your video and audio.
All right, let us gavel in and begin. As this hearing is fully virtual, we have to address a few housekeeping matters. For today's meeting, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they're not under recognition for purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will go ahead and unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You'll notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At the 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time is expired, the clock will turn red and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of the speaking order, we will begin with the chair and ranking member, then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority. And finally, members not present at the time the hearing is called to order. Finally, House rules do remind me to say to you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. The subcommittee will come to order. Good afternoon. This is the subcommittee's first hearing in the 117th Congress, and I am humbled to be taking over the gavel from our great Jose Serrano, CJS chair in the last Congress. CJS had become synonymous with the name Chair Jose Serrano, and I know that those are big shoes to fill. We miss him terribly. I do look forward to working together virtually, and I hope soon in person, with my terrific colleagues on both sides of the aisle of this subcommittee. I have a great partner in Congressman Robert Aderholt, and I know we both want to work collaboratively and productively toward many common goals. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome a few new members to our subcommittee. Representatives David Trone of Maryland, Ben Klein of Virginia, Mike Garcia of California, as well as one returning member, Representative Dutch Ruppersberger of Maryland. I'm so glad to have you all join us for the 117th Congress. I'd also like briefly to introduce and welcome all members of the subcommittee whom I've not yet mentioned. Representatives Grace Meng of New York, Charlie Crist of Florida, Ed Case of Hawaii, Brenda Lawrence of Michigan, and Steve Palazzo of Mississippi. I feel fortunate and humbled to have such a wonderful group of members on this subcommittee, and I'm confident we will achieve many great things together. Turning to the business of the subcommittee today, we undertake one of our key responsibilities, oversight of the federal agency operations and programs that we fund. We welcome today Michael Carvajal, Director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, or the BOP. In his first appearance before this committee, Director Carvajal began his career with BOP in 1992, assuming increasingly responsible positions in BOP institutions in Texas, Kansas, and Louisiana before being appointed the Northeast Regional Director in 2016 and the Assistant Director for the Correctional Programs Division in 2018. He was named Director of the Bureau in February of 2020. It's an overused expression, timing is everything. It would appear that you, Director Carvajal, took on your job when BOP's world was about to be upended. We can debate how much everyone was prepared to deal with the impact of a global pandemic, which the World Health Organization announced on January 30, 2020. But in hindsight, the 6 weeks that elapsed between that time and the March 13, 2020 White House emergency declaration was a terribly precious time, and I believe we have to examine the opportunities to protect a very vulnerable population that BOP missed during this critical juncture. Director Carvajal, you inherited an agency responsible for the safety, security, and welfare of over 175,000 inmates, 147,000 in 122 facilities owned and operated by the BOP itself, and about 37,000 BOP officers and staff. Over the past year, you have seen a 13% reduction in the overall inmate population and a 15% reduction in the population in BOP facilities, and you have 1,000 fewer officers and staff. This is the lowest BOP inmate population in over 20 years. These figures shed light on the challenging circumstances you have dealt with and your reaction to it. And part of the story are these unfortunate numbers. 225 inmates and 4 BOP employees dead from COVID-19. I'll repeat that, 225 inmates and 4 BOP employees dead from COVID-19, and over 47,000 inmates and 5,000 staff contracting this disease and recovered. Now, although BOP has grappled with massive logistics issues over the past year, managing a huge medical program, quarantine operation, and an ongoing security concern, I believe there are questions that need to be answered about whether BOP is meeting its safety responsibilities to its staff and its inmates. While the BOP system is vast and it sprawls across the country, I do believe BOP has struggled uniformly to implement proper safety standards and policies. I have received reports from correctional staff, inmates, even other correctional offices with BOP facilities, congressional offices with BOP facilities, the treatment, testing, quarantine policies, and general safety measures over the past year are simply not up to par. To help BOP cope with the unexpected costs of the pandemic, Congress appropriated $400 million in 2 different emergency supplementals in fiscal years 20 and 21. As such, today we will want answers about how BOP used and is using those funds. We want to make sure every possible measure is being taken and every dollar is being spent for the purpose of protecting those within the walls of the BOP facilities. Specifically, did you have adequate protective equipment? How did you make deployment decisions for that equipment? Were inmates and staff properly isolated and movement managed safely and promptly to reduce the risk of spreading disease within BOP or among the general public? Did BOP take full advantage of options to move inmates out of crowded quarters, such as through home confinement or compassionate release? Overall, how shall we assess BOP's treatment of those in its custody and the dedicated staff who work around the clock to carry out BOP's corrections mission? The examination of BOP's operation during the pandemic is not the only matter that deserves close examination in today's hearing. We'd also like to hear how BOP is addressing other things like reducing overcrowding and the use of staff augmentation, an issue I have contacted BOP about on several occasions in the past, grappling with the continuing threat from contraband, such as opioid drugs like fentanyl, and implementation of the First Step Act. In addition, we'd like to hear how BOP is addressing the ongoing and urgent challenge of its aging facilities and infrastructure. So once again, welcome, Director Carvajal, and we look forward to your testimony. At this time, I want to turn to my distinguished ranking member, Mr. Adderholt, for his comments.
Thank you for yielding, and I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today. And I'm, like you say, pleased to be here for the first official hearing of the FY 2022 appropriation cycle. And even though we have talked on several occasions, I want to formally congratulate you, Mr. Chairman, as your role as chair, and wish you well in this new role that you'll be undertaking. I look forward to working with you and also to find ways that we can fund programs that foster American competitiveness, enable new discoveries in science, both here on this earth and also in space, and to improve the capabilities of federal, state, and local law enforcement, just to name a few of the diverse and vital missions that is under the purview of this subcommittee. I, along with my staff, stand ready to work alongside you and your staff to continue the spirit of the camaraderie that we have shared on this subcommittee, and it's been a hallmark of the subcommittee for many years. On that note, I appreciate you recognizing all of the new members of the subcommittee. Of course, from the Republican standpoint, we have two new Republican members. First, we have Congressman Ben Cline, represents the 6th District of Virginia. He was a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. He chaired the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety. And he's also a former member of the Judiciary Committee. And we look forward to him sharing his perspective with the subcommittee. Also, Congressman Mike Garcia. He represents California's 25th District, and he is a decorated former naval officer and businessman. Congressman Garcia, we do thank you for your service to our nation and look forward to your insights as well, particularly in aviation and aerospace expertise, as well as economic development. Now, I'm pleased today, at this point today, to turn to today's witness, and also like Mr. Chairman, as you welcomed him, I'd like to welcome Director Carvajal as well. This hearing is an opportunity for us to hear about how the Bureau of Prisons is addressing the many challenges involved in preventing the spread of the coronavirus among the Bureau of Prisons inmate population. Also, I think it's important for us to learn about how the President's executive order mandating the closure of all BOP contract operated institutions is affecting your operations, particularly with respect to its unusual and untimely purpose, the displacement of thousands of inmates while in the throes of pandemic, which have taken the lives of, as mentioned, over 200 of the inmates already. So with that, I look forward to discussing these matters with you today. And again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
And thank you, Ranking Member Adderholt. And at this time, Director Carvajal, you are recognized for your opening remarks. Please try to keep your statement to 5 minutes. And remember, as always, your full written statement will be included in the record, so that enables you to keep the 5 minutes. You recognize Director Carvajal.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Cartwright, Ranking Member Adderholt, and members of the subcommittee. It is my privilege today to speak on behalf of the 37,000 Bureau of Prisons Corrections professionals who work day in and day out to support our critical law enforcement mission. I am committed to ensuring these dedicated men and women are guided by the values of respect, integrity, courage, and correctional excellence. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the Bureau's response to the pandemic, along with our efforts to provide inmates with the necessary programming to return to the community and to their families. I have spent the majority of my professional life and career service to this agency. After serving in the United States Army, I joined the Bureau as a correctional officer and moved up through the ranks to my current position as director. I care deeply about our work, the personal sacrifices the Bureau law enforcement officers make. The Bureau currently confines approximately 151,000 inmates in 122 federal prisons nationwide, as well as 200 community-based facilities and 10 private facilities. Almost 80% of our inmates are serving terms for drugs, weapons, or sex offenses, with 41% of those being medium and high security offenders. The pandemic has made the safe management of those offenders even more challenging, and yet we continue to maintain low levels of serious assaults while addressing reentry needs. However, it is with a heavy heart, and despite our best efforts, that I must report there have been 4 staff deaths, and 225 deaths related to COVID for the inmates. It's been suggested that the Bureau is spreading COVID within our communities. Contact tracing performed often reveals that the virus entered our prisons from the communities. A review shows that our institutions generally follow the same spikes and recoveries as seen in the communities where they are located. Therefore, it is vital that we all work together, the Bureau and the public, to combat this threat. I thank each of you for your continued support and providing the resources needed to manage this pandemic. Our response has often been mischaracterized in public forums. This is unfortunate, since from the first days of the pandemic, we have worked closely with the CDC. We've developed a response plan that reflects the best available guidance from the nation's leading experts. We continue to assess and update the plan by welcoming external stakeholders into our facilities and audits and to assure procedural compliance. These reviews, in addition to our own internal assessments and inspections, both scheduled and unannounced, are ongoing and assist us in developing best practices. Since the passage of the CARES Act through existing authorities, we have transferred almost 23,000 inmates to home confinement. We've been transparent regarding our mitigation plans, our operational adjustments, and data, including staff and inmate COVID cases, testing numbers, and now, fortunately, vaccine administration. Our public website contains a comprehensive overview of our current status and is updated daily. We are thankful that the Bureau was provided the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. I'm proud to say that we have administered over 80,000 doses to staff and inmates. The Bureau was recognized for leading all jurisdictions and federal entities in having the highest percentage of vaccines administered per doses allocated in the United States. In addition to responding to COVID, several of our facilities in Texas recently faced a severe winter weather event. Despite the unexpected impact on the surrounding infrastructure, including rolling blackouts, frozen water lines, and resource distribution, we were able to maintain our operations. At the request of FEMA, we also assisted the state of Texas during the emergency by providing logistical support and supplies to several local municipalities. Our staff have responded to these continuous challenges with dedication and resilience, and I am extremely proud of their work. An ongoing criticism of our agency has been a lack of appropriate staffing and a reliance on augmentation and overtime. We are committed to addressing these concerns by increasing our staffing levels nationwide and, more importantly, retaining our staff. We've initiated a hiring campaign focused solely on external hiring to maximize our staffing levels. All available recruitment and retention incentives, marketing strategies, and social media are being utilized to reach potential candidates and to retain staff. I'm honored to speak on behalf of all the Bureau staff who work tirelessly to mitigate the spread of this virus while carrying out our very important mission. This is challenging, but it is vital to the safety and security of the public, our staff, and the inmates entrusted to our care. Chairman Cartwright, Ranking Member Adderholt, and other distinguished members of this subcommittee, this concludes my statement.
Thank you, Director Carvajal. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Director Carvajal, roughly 40% of BOP's budget is for inmate care and programs, of which about $1.3 billion is for inmate medical care. Given this and the inherent risks posed by contagious disease in the close quarters of corrections facilities, where getting up close and personal is the daily life there, it seems prudent that BOP would already have robust plans for pandemic contingencies already in place. And I would imagine this would include some form of decision hierarchy and options for escalating responses, adapting to changing conditions, and knowing when to throw out the playbook and call in outside help and resources. So while recognizing that few anticipate the scale of this global pandemic, in your view, did BOP plans in place in 2020 include sufficient plans for a system-wide infectious disease outbreak?
Thank you, Chairman. That is certainly a question that should be answered. And I will tell you that the answer to that is yes, we have contingency plans. I think the Bureau of Prisons has a well-documented positive history of dealing with pandemics before, influenza outbreaks, measles, chickenpox, Ebola, things of that nature. However, as you're certainly aware, and I was actually, my infamous quote when I said I don't think anybody was ready for this shortly after I got this position, what I was referring to is what I think we've all seen in this world, is that this COVID was, it's huge. We learned a lot of things on the fly. One of the big things that's different here was the ability to social distance and how that played a factor in. Prisons, as you know, Chairman, are not made for social distancing. So that was one of the more obvious lessons we learned. And never did I.
Let me stop you there if I might. I only get 5 minutes. That I want to have 3 questions here in 5 minutes. To me, you said yes, there were plans in place, and my question is: were such plans widely understood by BOP personnel, and were they adequately trained on them, including steps and sequences?
Yes, Chairman. As you mentioned, in late January, our medical director, as late as last week of January, had already implemented a task force specific to COVID with the medical folks and had sent out guidance. So we were already working on what was going to occur and distributed to the medical folks. Probably in retrospect, what we could have done a little better was spread that out to everyone else along with the medical folks. One of the first briefings I received as a new director was on COVID, and I will tell you that it was very enlightening to see what was going on. But that is one of the lessons learned. But I am happy to say that our medical people were already on this.
That's what I'm after. What are the lessons learned? And the question is, what forward-looking plans have you put in place based on the lessons learned to ensure you're prepared for any future disease outbreak situations?
Chairman, we've done a lot of best practices, lessons learned. We established COVID compliance review teams for just that, to review facilities. We send many unannounced. We stocked up on PPE. One thing that I am happy to say is that traditionally we keep a high amount of PPE. I will tell you, I was very nervous and worried about obtaining it early on. As you well know, everyone was out to get it, but it was happy to know that we had a good stockpile already. We built a national logistics center, a regional logistics site, and we ensure that there is appropriate PPE. We at no time ran low on PPE, but we were concerned about appropriate usage of it and control of it.
Okay, that leads to my next question. How well resourced was BOP in its facilities, its staff, logistics, and supplies to deal with the pandemic?
Well, Chairman, as I mentioned earlier, we traditionally have contingency plans for everything. So we had the base things in place. Where I think that, as I mentioned earlier, that we were prepared was the magnitude of what the pandemic entails. So we scrambled, as everyone else, to ensure that we got appropriate PPE. As far as our procedures, we've been in lockstep with the Centers for Disease Control and other organizations from day one. My medical director speaks to them at a minimum weekly. So our plans were actually used to assist develop a correctional pandemic response plan. So I would say that we were working through that and evolving as we went.
All right, the last question I have is, it relates to the transfer of inmates from one place to another. That happens all the time in the BOP. It has always happened. But as I mentioned, in an emergency and in a new situation, you have to be ready to throw out the playbook and adapt to new circumstances. What did BOP do to adapt to the new circumstances? Once it became clear, all you had to do is read the newspaper to realize that taking somebody's temperature wasn't enough to make sure that the disease wasn't being transmitted. What did BOP do to adapt to that knowledge?
Yes, Chairman, as I said, we've been in lockstep with CDC and consulting with them. Our procedures were, from the start, we started quarantine and isolation procedures, enhanced screening. I know that you mentioned the movement, and I certainly know we were scrutinized for that. What I will say is that we're statutorily obligated. The courts never stopped. They slowed down, and I appreciate that. but we had to relieve all of those local and county facilities and take inmates that were designated to us. Essentially, sir, it's our mission, so I couldn't stop and not take in inmates.
That's all I have for now. I'm going to yield to Ranking Member Adderholt.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Is it coming through?
Yes.
Okay, good. Director Carvajal, you stated in your testimony that the Bureau of Prisons does not control who the court places in the actual system. But the president stated in a recent executive order, without any evidence, that, quote, to decrease incarceration levels, we must reduce profit-based incentives to incarcerate by phasing out the federal government's reliance on privately operated criminal detention facilities. The question that I would have for you is, I would just want to clarify with you, since you are currently the nation's foremost authority on the prison system, is it judges and it's not prison operators or administrators that actually make sentencing decision? Is that correct?
Yes, Congressman, I would agree.
And are you aware of any profit-based incentives that are influencing prison sentences by our federal judges?
No, Congressman, I personally am not aware of any.
Thanks. And as I had alluded to, this past January, the president signed the executive order that eliminated the use of privately operated detention facilities, which ends all agreements with detention contractors. What would happen to the people who work at these facilities? And literally, there's thousands of people who work across the nation, from Big Spring, Texas, to Moshannon Valley, Pennsylvania, to Baldwin, Michigan, and their local economics, given that the president literally took away the jobs with signing this executive order. For example, Baldwin, Michigan, where North Lake Federal Correction Institute is located, it has a population of roughly 1,100 people. North Lake employs 260 people. And I realize that this is a rhetorical question, but because what type of impact would this have? Even though, like I said, I know you're not responsible for it. Just get your thoughts on what impact it would have overall.
Yes, Congressman, it's difficult for me to answer that question, because I'm gonna say that there's an obvious impact. I can't sit here and tell you that human beings are going to be impacted, because that's obvious if there aren't jobs available. Unfortunately, I don't have control over what the privates do. We have contracts. My concern, my responsibility as the director is to ensure that we utilize taxpayer money appropriately, and that I manage the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And in order to do that, I have to maintain and make sure that we are appropriately utilizing the funds, obviously, that you so graciously give us. And I need to make sure that there's a need for those beds. And I will say, Congressman, that back last year, late November, December, we were in the process. We'd already evaluated this. And in my previous position as assistant director, I actually oversaw the privates. We'd already made a decision, because of bed space needs and not needing it, to expire some of those contracts through natural progression. So we didn't know anything about this executive order till it came out, but we had already made that decision for the contracts that are currently being closed. I do want to point out, sir, those had nothing to do with executive order. That was an internal decision based on what we're supposed to be doing, is that's effectively using our funds.
What's going on?
You're muted, Mr. Adderholt.
Second. How's that?
Yep.
Just, I just want to point out that a loss of vital, good-paying jobs is not only a problem with an executive order like this, but you noted that the Bureau of Prison instituted a 14-day quarantine protocol for any necessary inmate movement. And the CDC guidelines on inmate quarantine recommends housing quarantined inmates are, quote, separately in a single cell with solid walls and solid doors fully closed, followed by separately in a single cell with solid walls but without solid floors. That sounds like solitary confinement, which I know BOP tries to minimize as much as possible. My question is, the Bureau of Prisons following that CDC guidelines and isolating thousands of inmates who are or will be transferred out of the contract operated facilities for a 14-day period?
Congressman, the short answer to that is yes. But I will note that I actually don't like the medical term isolation for the reasons you said. We don't like to do that. Here's something that we learned during COVID, because the CDC told us that we should be doing that, and my medical professionals advised me to. On the correctional side of me, I struggle with that for the reasons you said. But yes, we try to follow as much as possible the isolation guidelines. We're mandated to do that. We do it. But what we have done to mitigate the other area of leaving them in isolation, medical isolation, there is a difference, is that we do enhanced screening. They're checked on twice a day. We make sure that staff are engaging them and making sure that that their needs are met. So we understand the other challenges that brings potentially with mental health and things like that. But I have to listen to the experts, and I don't make these decisions in a vacuum. My medical director advises, and then we use that information to make the best decision, sir.
Okay, thank you. And I see my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. At this point, we recognize Representative Charlie Crist for 5 minutes of questions.
Chairman, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be in this important hearing, our first. And I want to thank the ranking member, Adderholt, who I went to the same law school, not with, but the same law school in Alabama. So thank you, Director. It's wonderful to have you with us today. As you know, then Attorney General Barr directed the Bureau to prioritize the release to home confinement of vulnerable and qualified inmates. Presently, BOP has about 7,500 prisoners under home confinement. And your website indicates the total number placed in home confinement since March 26th of last year is over 22,000. What have you learned about the use of home confinement during the pandemic, and has it been underutilized, and could the Bureau do more to leverage this opportunity? Please.
Thank you, Congressman. That's a great question, and I will tell you that first of all, that we have utilized the authorities given to us as directed by the Attorney General to the best we could, following the guidance that was given to us. Your numbers that you mentioned are there. What I will say that created us a quagmire is that the current statute for home confinement is for a reentry transitional program for inmates at the end of their sentence. The statute, the CARES Act didn't change that. So what that did is we've been applying inmates to home confinement for COVID reasons under that statute, which created some challenges, okay?
Sure.
As you're well aware, you said we have about 7,500, about 4,500 of those currently are CARES Act home confinement. So we maximize the use of our authority as best as possible. The Attorney General gave us the criteria, and we followed that, sir.
I have a question. So of the existing low-risk inmates, how many have not been put into home confinement? Do you know offhand?
No, Congressman, I don't know the exact numbers.
Well, if you can get it for me, that'd be great. I'd appreciate it.
I will follow up with those.
Yes, you will do that? Yes, please. Thanks. Great.
Yes.
So I'm curious, in the area of nonviolent marijuana convictions, do you have the breakdown of how many of those individuals have been given home confinement?
No, Congressman, not specifically that, but I will tell you that one of the non-discretionary criteria. Yes, I can.
That'd be great. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I think I just have one other. We all know how important it is to get vaccinated, especially vulnerable populations and our frontline workers. And I understand that corrections officers and the staff of the Bureau of Prisons facilities have been offered vaccines. Can you speak to how many employees have taken you up on the offer or what percentage?
Yes, Congressman. Everyone in the Bureau of Prisons, employee-wise, has had the opportunity, been offered the vaccine, and approximately right about 49% have accepted it. We certainly are continuing to encourage it and offer it. So if someone changes their mind or wasn't available, they can tell us if they want it, and we'll make arrangements to make sure they get it.
How many employees do you have?
We have currently about a little over 37,000, Congressman.
37,000. Why do you think it is that less than half have opted to be vaccinated when it's been offered to 100%? Does that strike you as odd?
Congressman, I wish I could answer that, but I certainly can't force it on anyone. And I will tell you this, I am vaccinated and I encourage all of my staff to get it. That's the best I can do.
I am too. And, not to interrupt, I'm just having a conversation. I am too, and I'm grateful for that. And, there's about 100 of my colleagues that have been offered the opportunity to be vaccinated as well. And I'm heartbroken that they are not vaccinated, not only for them, but for people that they may socialize with, even if socially distanced appropriately, that they may end up infecting them or being infected themselves and dying. I mean, it boggles my mind. You have any opinion on that? As a leader in our country?
Sir, as a leader and the director of the Bureau of Prisons, my responsibility is to encourage my staff to take the available protections, and that's what I've done. I certainly respect people's personal choices, though.
Oh yeah, I do too. I do too. I don't comprehend it very well. Maybe that's my fault. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it very much, sir. And keep up the good work and setting a good example.
Thank you.
Of course.
Recognize Representative Stephen Palazzo for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director Carvajal, thank you for being here today. As we progressed through the pandemic, there was a quick realization that senior living facilities were a recipe for rapid community spread. That same notion of how close communal living created a risk for controlling the spread of COVID was realized for a less sympathized type of facility, our prisons. Myself and my office received several calls and texts from family members in a panic about their elder loved ones and their fate sitting in a prison during the pandemic. They closely watched as Attorney General Barr released updated directives regarding home confinement. It got to a point where it was clear that these family members in prison who were nonviolent offenders were qualified for home confinement for AG Barr's directives, but the BOP had taken no action on getting these individuals out. My staff resorted to reaching out to legislative affairs staffers within the BOP to move these cases along. It is my opinion that cutting off visitors created a huge problem. There was no transparency for families as to how prisoners were actually being treated in the new COVID environment. Families were now even more worried about the care of their relatives, and the lack of communication from BOP and the prisoner themselves only exasperated things. So my question is, what are the lessons learned from the COVID situation at BOP, and how will this overall process be improved?
Thank you, Congressman. Very good questions. First off, I'll tell you that the decision to stop visiting was a very difficult one. I certainly understand, after spending 30 years in this agency, the importance of visiting, and certainly it's part of our reentry process, the effect that family contact has. So that weighed heavily on me. But first and foremost, as you stated earlier, our responsibility is to make sure that we protect and keep everyone safe, inmates, their families, and staff. So we had to think through that. I am happy to say that as lessons learned and we adjusted to COVID on how we could mitigate these things, a lot of our institutions were able to come up with creative ways to build barriers and safely do this, make appointment system, things of that nature, so that we could reunite the families with the inmates. That is important. So those are some of the lessons learned. We've done the same things you see that schools are doing, restaurants, put up barriers, spread people apart, limit the amount of folks in there at one time. It was a difficult decision, but I think it was important to do at the time.
Yeah, I appreciate that response. Also, throughout this pandemic, how many people were actually released to home confinement from BOP?
Well, as I stated earlier, Congressman, over 23,000 transferred to home confinement. They're still in our custody. A lot of people believe they're released, but they haven't been. And then, of course, there's the compassionate releases. I'm aware of about 3,000 of those. I will tell you that off my head, people have released out of our system, and I don't have that current number, but I can certainly follow up with you. Total releases over the year. I can follow up with you on that. I'm sorry, sir, I can't hear you.
Oh, all right. Well, I didn't even touch the mute button, but somebody muted me. I'll find out who that is later. Can you briefly describe the actual criteria for the compassionate home confinement?
Okay, so Congressman, it's a little bit, I know it's difficult. I have trouble remembering this sometimes, but the home confinement criteria is separate. The compassionate release criteria, the key there is extraordinary and compelling circumstances that wouldn't have been known at the time of sentencing. That's what makes it so difficult. It isn't listed. There's a lot of criteria. It's a very serious situation to look at. In the fact of COVID, obviously it's COVID risk and medical, so it's not a timely process. And essentially what the compassionate release does is they're asking me to make a motion to the court to undo a sentence that was imposed by a judge in a court. That's not a quick process. How we alter that is everyone that submits a packet for compassionate release, we review automatically for home confinement because that's the quickest way to get somebody into the community and the safest way.
Addressing those released for home confinement, do these folks ever go back to prison?
That's a great question, Congressman, and we haven't got there yet. The statute did not, it didn't say whether or not. There was no guidance there. It didn't change the rule. I will tell you that of the numbers there, we have discussed that with the oncoming administration, and I'm waiting to have further discussion and see what we will do. But we do have a plan should we need to take them back.
All right, Director, thank you so much for your time. I yield back.
Thank you. And the chair recognizes Congressman Ed Case for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Director, I join everybody else in thanking you for what is a tough job in any event, but especially over the last year. So thank you for your service and for all of the folks that serve with you. I really just need to follow up on Congressman Chris' questions relative to vaccinations. Let me just ask you a question that it seems that we dance around. Are you able to compel your correctional officers who work in close quarters, about the closest quarters in the country, a highly difficult environment to start with, but tailor-made for the spread of COVID? Are you able to compel them to be vaccinated as a condition of employment?
Congressman, I've asked that question early on because of the obvious scrutiny and the questions we get, and the answer to that is no. At this point, I cannot. The reason I cannot is because the vaccines as they are issued now have not been FDA approved. They're under emergency use authorization, so I can't compel them to. Obviously, we have a collective bargaining agreement. So at that point, should we ever make that decision once you're authorized, I still have to negotiate that process appropriately and respecting people's rights because it will become a condition of employment. And if someone refused the vaccine, potentially may not have a job. So it's a little bit more of a process. But at this point in time, no, sir, I cannot compel them to take it. I can just make it available and encourage it.
You cannot compel them to take it because it is not fully FDA approved, and because it is not fully FDA approved, somehow there is some condition about this vaccine that calls into question whether is a fit. I'm not sure I follow the connection between the FDA approval and your ability to compel.
Congressman, I certainly understand because I don't fully understand it myself. And as you're aware, I get guidance and counsel from people. So between my medical personnel, my legal personnel, and my personnelist, the human resource side, we have had extensive conversation. I assure you, if I could compel it, just for the sake of, to me, common sense, I would do it. But do have to follow the rules, sir, and I respect that. So yeah, I can get back with you at which point that changes. But that's the best I can explain it to you right now.
Are you able to compel the inmates of the prisons to take a vaccine? Same reasoning, or they're not subject to a collective bargaining agreement? Is the FDA approval side of it still applicable from your understanding?
Yes, the guidance I've been given, Congressman, by my medical folks and my general counsel on the legal aspects is the same reasoning, is that I can't compel an inmate. We do offer it, we encourage it, but I can't make anyone take the vaccine.
And same question as Mr. Chris asked you as to the officers. Have you actually offered the vaccine to all inmates, and what is the percentage of acceptance versus refusal?
Great question, Congressman. As I stated earlier, 100% of our staff have been offered. On the inmates, no dose goes unused with us. So if we offer it, we get the vaccine, we offer it to the staff. If they choose not to take it, we use it on inmates. There is a priority list for the most vulnerable. At this point in time, about 25% of the population has been vaccinated. By July, the last thing I was told was by July, 100% of inmates will have been offered the vaccination. Okay. So
Okay,
I hope I explained that right.
And so that's a slightly different answer to than the question I asked. The question I asked was, of the inmates offered, how many have said, okay, I'll do it, whenever it happens, and how many have refused? Is the percentage roughly half-half, as was the case with the officers themselves?
All right, Congressman, I apologize because that makes it clear. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that we utilize it. So I don't know exactly the percentage of how many are refusing it or opting not to take it, but I can follow up with you on that. I'm sure we have those numbers.
Thank you very much. Let me make an observation in the very few seconds I have remaining, sir. The fact that 1/2 of the officers are declining to take a vaccination that is available to them in this charged situation is unexplainable. I don't know how to explain that. You have something like almost 40% of the inmates that have now been infected, it seems to be, in one way, shape, or form by COVID, if I understand your statistics correctly. I apologize, Mr. Chair. I just want to make this point. Something's wrong if 1/2 of the officers that can take it don't. And I don't know whether that's a lack of information or misinformation or some misunderstanding in the officer force, but it is a public health matter that many decline to take it, and something's wrong there. So I'll leave it at that, and hope that there's an answer to that at some point.
The chair recognizes Congressman Ben Klein for 5 minutes of questions.
I thank the chairman. I look forward to contributing to the subcommittee's work. I want to thank the ranking member and all my colleagues on the subcommittee, and it's great to be a new member. I will take a slightly different approach to the questions, follow up on my colleague, Congressman Palazzo's questioning about home confinement, because I do think that the constitutional and other questions around forced vaccinations kind of, present themselves pretty clearly. But Director Carvajal, since March of 2020, BOP has transferred over 23,000 inmates to home confinement. how has the BOP monitored this significant increase in inmates outside of its facilities?
Well, Congressman, the majority of those inmates, 94% of those inmates in community confinement, which is including home confinement, are monitored by contracts. I want to stress that that's one of the reasons that we really look at who we put out, because we do take public safety and weigh that heavily. Those 94% monitors or contracts, they are not law enforcement officials, okay? They are simply providing oversight and contracting. The other 6% are monitored by United States Probation Office through electronic monitoring.
Thank you. I was a prosecutor for several years. It was local prosecution, but same dynamic applied. You had home confinement with ankle bracelets or monitoring. We had several instances where there were violations of home confinement. Have you seen any increase in the rate of violations of home confinement since you have transferred all 23,000 inmates to home confinement?
It's a good question, Congressman. I am aware of 21 people being brought back into secure custody. Only one of those was a new crime. The other ones were violations. I don't know the numbers prior to that, Congressman, but I can certainly look at them. But I am aware of the 21 since passage of the CARES Act.
Okay, thank you. And do you recall what that new crime was?
Hey, Congressman, as I said it, I was trying to remember it. No, sir, at this point I don't, but I can certainly follow up with you.
I'd appreciate that. Now, in terms of the contracts, are those specific to the kinds of technology that has to be used in the home confinement, the terms of their confinement, or is it pretty much left to the contracting agency?
No, sir. We in the statement of work, we spell out the requirements. It is for electronic monitoring. There's a few exceptions because it has to do with either a disability or something of that nature. It's a very small percentage. The majority of them, the vast majority of them, are electronic monitoring. Of course, there's also now cell phone monitoring and tracking, things of that nature. But that's predominantly what we do. We write that into the statement of work to make sure that they can meet the obligations that we want.
Now, is the statement of work pretty clear on reporting requirements in cases of violation where any and all triggers of the devices have to be reported back to BOP, and so these companies can't hide a lot of the malfunctions or violations that might be occurring?
Congressman, I don't specifically know the answer to that, but I will tell you that we do checks on the contractors. Obviously, we do quarterly, we do unannounced checks on them and things of that nature. So we do monitor that, but to answer your particular question, I don't have that information. I can certainly follow up with you, sir.
That'd be great. I'm just encountering this subject for the first time. So can you tell me how many different contracting businesses there are? I mean, are there dozens or hundreds, or how many?
I believe at last count, we had approximately 80 different vendors we used. So, it varies. It goes up and down, but it was 80 the last count.
Okay. Thank you very much. I see my time's running out, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first thing, I left this committee about 10 years ago. And when I had the opportunity to come back, I decided this is where I wanted to be. I think the issues we have to deal with are extremely important. I think we've got a good team on both sides of the aisle. And I think if we work in a bipartisan way, we can get a lot accomplished. There's a lot of issues on the table now and what jurisdiction we do have here. Now, I know your employees are hardworking individuals. It's a tough business. I was a former prosecutor years ago and had to deal with someone with the prison guards. They really go all out and do as much as they can, and they need to be protected, including from COVID. Now, these hearings are about us getting answers and holding you and your agency accountable, but it also should provide us with guideposts to help address gaps, shortfalls, and problems. Now, the recent data, not really the recent data. I know, by the way, we can't force vaccination, but can't your medical team determine how prison staff not getting vaccinations are impacting rate of infections in prisons? Is it causing a boomerang effect of prisoners or staff getting affected? And I know two other members also addressed this issue. And I think we have to address it because the numbers are real that we're having some problems in this regard. Now, the recent data from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health states that COVID-19 cases are often detected among staff before prisoners. Compared to the rest of the U.S. population, cases in prisons are 3.2 times more prevalent among prison staff and 4.6 times more prevalent among prison residents, who then die from COVID-19 at a 3 times higher rate than same age populations. Now, given this, would you characterize COVID-19 to be a graver danger? And I have 4 questions. Would you characterize COVID-19 to be a grave danger? Would you be willing to submit to a federal safety standard to protect your employees? What are you doing to prioritize vaccine distribution and uptake among prisoners and staff? And what prevents the Bureau from adopting more transparent process for compassionate release? Did you get that?
Yes, Congressman, I will tell you that we, as I stated earlier, our medical director and his team are in lockstep with CDC. So I'm not a doctor, so I have to listen to those experts. Sometimes I'll be perfectly honest with you, Congressman, I don't like the decisions I have to make. I don't like the guidance I'm given, but I do listen to them because they are the experts. So I follow that guidance closely. And as you stated with the vaccine, we're certainly, I mentioned that we were recognized for vaccine distribution. That's because that's one of the things that I think we did rather well. We had a plan in place and we issued it and we encourage everyone to take it. So that's something that I think is a positive. As far as making sure that people are safe, we certainly do that. I think that's a commitment we make all the time to make sure that we're doing everything possible to protect the inmates and the staff. You mentioned the staff of the vaccination. That's one of the reasons that we prioritize staff over the inmates, because the potential for them, because they come and go into the community. So inmates are actually protected under the umbrella if staff are vaccinated. That's one of the reasons we do that. And sir, I think I missed another part of your question. If you could.
How about the percentage of guards that are not taking shots voluntarily? And I know you have issues dealing with it legally, but it seems to me there's got to be a way to change that number, because if the guards aren't being protected, then the inmates aren't being protected. And that's a big issue. It's a big problem. And I would hope maybe you're under the umbrella of justice, that we really take a look at that and ask justice and your attorneys to look at that, because it's going to happen if nobody gets the shots. And these people on the guards on the outside get infected. And I'm really concerned about that. I think it's one of the big issues. And let me say this, you have a tough job, and everybody who works in prisons have tough jobs. And you've got to have integrity. You've got to work as a team to back each other up. It's not an easy job. And it's very easy for us to criticize, because a lot of things happen in prison that don't happen other places. But I think until we deal with that issue, as long as COVID's around, until we smash it out, I think we really have to focus on guards protecting themselves so they protect your inmates, because that's their job, basically.
Yes, sir, I understand, and I will tell you, I'm committed to providing that information and education, and we continue to encourage it, because I agree that we should have as many vaccinated as possible. But as I stated earlier, sir, I can't make anyone take that vaccine.
Well, we've got to look into that. I know that's what you're saying, and I'm not arguing with you. I think we really have to focus and see when they have certain jobs. If you want to operate on somebody in this country, you have to be a doctor. And it's the same thing here. When we know that people are getting COVID and we can't stop it because they refuse to get a shot, it's not enough. So, Mr. Chairman, I really hope that we can focus on that one issue itself, because I think until we do, we're still going to have a lot of problems. And I read you the numbers from Johns Hopkins Lindbergh School of Medicine for that reason.
It's a point well taken, Congressman Ruppersberger, and I want to now recognize Congressman Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on CJS. This is my first subcommittee hearing, and thank you, Ranking Member Adderholt, for the kind welcome. Director Carbajal, I want to thank you for your service to our great nation, not only in your current position and prior roles in the corrections industry, but as an Army personnelman as well. So thank you, sir. This issue of privately managed versus BOP operated facilities in the midst of the COVID pandemic, using COVID deaths as a measure of merit, as the metric, if you will, which entity performed better than the other? Were the privately owned, privately operated facilities more successful at preventing COVID deaths than the government ones, or vice versa?
No, Congressman, that's a tough question, because I think that even one death obviously weighs heavily on me, and it's they weigh heavily on me. Even one,
Sure.
One is too many. But I will tell you that it's hard to compare that because our numbers are so different. And no, I don't have any data as far as percentages and all that. I will tell you though that I do believe that our staff have done a great job considering the circumstances and what we've learned. I'm happy to say there's only 6 inmates in the hospital right now, 0 on vents, and I think that again that shows that we've gotten a handle on this somewhat. But I do not have the numbers that you're talking about. I can certainly look them up and get back with you on that. As far as a comparison,
that would be great. I think that's one of the metrics that is probably one of the most important if we're looking at this seriously and how to prevent it in the future. The number of deaths seems to be a metric we should be tracking. You mentioned early in your testimony that some of the privately owned contracts expire due to a lack of demand. Is it reasonable to infer from that statement then that from a capacity perspective, the BOP is actually doing well right now with what you have?
what I can tell you, Congressman, is that we obviously have increased capacity. That was one of the things that we took into consideration. Now, the last few years, our population has trended downward. It's really hard to predict a year or two out how many beds we're going to need, but somehow our research people have seemed to hit it pretty close. We are not predicting an increase. Certainly, if priorities change with the front end, we'll see an increase, but that hasn't shown the case. And because we put the 23,000 on home confinement, and through natural releases, we release about 40,000 a year in general. We have capacity right now. Right now, we have about 55,000 empty beds in our system right now.
Okay, and in a nominal world outside of a pandemic such as the one we have, where we have early release options, would that be about the same vacancy rate, or would you foresee the demand rising above the levels of capacity right now that you have?
Again, Congressman, I don't know the exact numbers because I haven't looked at them, but I will tell you that our population was downward trending, so to speak. So one thing we are doing is taking advantage of this we establish some target pops. One of the best practices, I think this is related to what we've been talking about. is that we couldn't social distance, as I stated a couple of times. What this lower capacity has allowed us to do, though, is spread that population in those open barracks. So we put a target percent of 50% capacity, and that has also led to making it safer in the prison. Now, obviously, we won't always have that ability, but we're revisiting how we put capacities on those low open dorm types because of what we learned during COVID.
Okay, yeah, and I would just, obviously those low efficiency models are unique, hopefully only to a pandemic, and that's not something we should be striving for in the end. In your estimation, at the state level, there were some prisons and jails that decided to release more inmates probably than the 23,000 that are within BOP even. In your estimation, did that save more lives than it ended up costing? Did that save more prisoners from dying of COVID than it did victims dying of actions as a result of prisoners on an early release program?
Congressman, I can't answer that question because I don't know the data and I don't have it, so it would be pure speculation, and I don't want to do that, sir.
Okay, I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you, Director.
Thank you. At this time, the chair recognizes Congressman David Trone for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a long-going interest in the criminal justice reform, and the Bureau of Prisons is certainly key to that. Director, I met with you in my office and your staff 6 days on March 3rd, 2020, after you came into office. And we had a wonderful meeting, and we gave you a whole list of things we wanted responses to because you were new, and we never got those responses. Then on March 31st, we followed up with a letter with all of our questions, and we never got a response. On April the 17th, we followed up with another letter, and we never got a response. On 4/23, my staff met with your staff, and we never got a response. So we resent the letter this week because we have a new sheriff in town, President Biden. I'm on this committee now, which has some oversight, and just a yes or a no, because I recommend to the Biden administration that you and your staff are incompetent and be fired. So my question for you is, can I get a yes to answering all of our questions?
Yes, Congressman.
Thank you. That would be just great. 1 year later. Next question. I've been made aware that a number of BOP facilities, including one in my region, returned FSA funding for long-term investments to help with eligible occupational training. We'd like an answer on that, if you could, in writing, as the number of dollars returned and what facilities returned them, and why exactly they couldn't use those dollars to help the eligible occupational training programs, which were put into effect to help reduce our prison group with FSA funding. Can you get that information to us?
Yes, I will, Congressman.
Perfect, thank you. The other issue I've suffered a bit of setbacks on is data collection. I think we need data in your system, and a lot of our requests are about that. The IRC recommended real-time recidivism data that shows outcomes, related information, to effectively evaluate FSA pattern, what they call risk assessment instrument, and your rehabilitative programming. This would require significantly expanded data collection, evaluation, dissemination of post-release outcomes, because we're all about outcomes, so I can drive recidivism lower, including data about rearrests, unemployment, employment, and other post indicators of incarceration. What plan does BOP have to undertake this clearly necessary expansion of data collection, tracking the progress of our incarcerated individuals from prison to reentry, home confinement, et cetera, and then later into supervision, and what resources does your office need so we can make this all happen?
Okay, thank you, Congressman. First of all, I do recall our visit, and it was a good visit. And I will tell you that I will certainly look into the first I'm hearing about these non-responses. I assure you, I will not make an excuse. I'll find out what happened. There is a clearance process. It certainly shouldn't take a year. So my apologies on that, sir. No disrespect intended. I will also tell you, given the opportunity, that we're going to address these issues. I won't talk about what happened before, but I am here now. And I will look at the data. I know I asked the same questions. Part of the money we're using for First Step Back is to work with outside vendors and contractors to do just what you're saying. I don't know why it wasn't done before, sir. I can't answer that question. But we are committed to doing it going forward.
Okay, you're going to get me that information back on the money that was returned, where it was returned, and why we couldn't execute the money that you were given to help our returning citizens. Thank you.
Yes,
Quickly,
Congress,
we'll follow up some more later, but private sector partnerships. We've got to give folks a fair shot at employment, and it shouldn't be just because of their criminal history that they're excluded. So you launched, the Bureau did a Ready to Work initiative in June of 19 to improve reentry outcomes, working directly with employers to hire individuals. My company's hired over 500 returning citizens. And the question is, what were the lessons learned from the Ready to Work initiative? And are you planning another iteration of this much needed program?
Well, Congressman, I know I remember discussing that program with you, and I certainly support it. I will tell you that right now I'm not familiar with any numbers on that program. We've obviously been dealing with COVID. Now, I get reports on a lot of things. One thing that I certainly will get back to you on is that the returning of money. I'm certainly not aware of that, but I will find these answers for you, Congressman, and follow up with you.
Thank you. I yield back, and we'll follow up with this point also in writing too. So we're have a beautiful trail, which I like. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, the chair recognizes Congresswoman Grace Meng for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Dr. and Director Carvajal for being here and for your work. I have two questions. One is about pregnant inmates, which, as you know, are especially vulnerable population. According to national guidance, pregnant women should receive regular prenatal care, screening, diagnostic tests. Recent GAO findings indicate that the BOP's policies on pregnancy-related care don't align with national guidance. Specifically, national guidance has 16 pregnancy-related care topics. BOP policies fully align on only 8 of the 16. Just wanted to ask, what policies does the BOP have in place to ensure that pregnant inmates have access to regular quality prenatal care, and also what sort of data is does the BOP track related to pregnant inmates?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I know that I certainly very, very much interested in this, pregnant inmates and making sure that they're safe. I will follow up with my medical director. I'm familiar with what you're talking about, the recommendations and all that, but I'm not familiar of why we aren't there. I will certainly find out. I will tell you that during COVID, we've gone above and beyond to make sure that those pregnant females are taken care of. There's only 7 in our custody. The only reason that they remain in our custody, not in the community, is because they don't meet the criteria or they have mental challenges, things of that nature. So it's an important topic. I will tell you that, and this goes to Congressman Trone and a couple of these other issues that of our failures in the past. I've established a task force recently after speaking and meeting with GAO to address some of these issues. And again, I won't make excuses about why we haven't done something. All I can tell you is, given the opportunity going forward, we're gonna address these things, and that task force is going to help me get the plans in place, find out where the breakdowns were, and identify these issues so that we can make sure that we don't repeat these things, and we have that information for you going forward.
Great, thank you. And then I have another question about the issue of solitary confinement. Last year, NPR reported the use of solitary confinement in prisons as a response to curb the spread of COVID-19. prior to COVID, there were about 60,000 inmates in solitary confinement. Last June, when this was reported, the numbers were in the hundreds of thousands in both federal and state prisons. Knowing that solitary confinement can cause serious physical and psychological harm and is actually an internationally recognized form of torture, wanted to ask how many inmates are in solitary confinement today, how many are there due to COVID, and how long on average are inmates kept in solitary confinement?
Okay, Congresswoman, good questions. I know that this is a big topic in my previous assignment, and honestly, coming up the ranks, I'm very familiar with we call special housing. I don't use the word solitary confinement because it's not reflective of what we do. I understand your concerns with it, but we don't put people in there. The average stay is about 75 days for special housing. The answer to your question about how many in there for COVID, zero, should be zero. Now, we do have medical isolation, so we can't confuse these things, but we should not be. I am not aware of anyone. My expectation is that no inmates are in the special housing unit because of COVID. Now, I have to explain this. What I will say that there have been times where inmates who were in special housing, because that's where they were quartered, contacted COVID. So we obviously manage them there. So there's some differences there. But today, this morning, there was a little over 8,500 inmates in special housing, to answer your other question.
Thank you. Can I just ask a follow-up? The 8,500 inmates who are in there for about, on average, 75 days, do they have access to phone calls to the outside world?
Yes, Congresswoman, they do. The time they're a little bit more restricted depending on if they're in there for a disciplinary infraction. Obviously, there's sanctions that go with that. But yes, inmates in special housing are afforded phone calls, the same opportunities as the inmates in general population, as much as possible, but keeping in mind that that's a secure area. So yes, they do get access to phone calls, not as frequently as inmates in the general population, though.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. At this point, the chair recognizes Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you. Hello.
Congresswoman Lawrence, I want to say it looks like you are logged in twice.
Okay. So I will leave.
Now it looks like you are logged in once, but we can't hear you.
So I'm very special. I have to be on here twice.
That's sounding good
so
now.
much. May I start now?
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you, first of all, to my chairman, Cartwright, for yielding and working with you as a second-term member of CJS, and under your leadership is an honor for me. I want you to know I serve as the co-chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus, and I want to focus on issues faced by too many female inmates during this pandemic. According to records, at one such facility, the Danbury, a minimum security facility called the camp, 34 of 50 inmates tested positive for COVID. According to other records, there was a lack of hand soap in the women's bathroom, even though CDC guidelines specifically stress the need to constantly wash your hands. In some incidents, female inmates were rushed to other makeshift sleeping areas, often without notice, forcing them to leave behind critical medical and feminine hygiene products. So, Director, I find these reports to be incredibly disappointing. In the midst of a global pandemic, can you explain why many female inmates are not given access to basic female hygiene products?
Congresswoman, I will also say that I find that unacceptable and I find it hard to believe. And if it happened, then I would like to know when and where so that I can do something about it. I will also say that we've had many reports of things like this. As I stated in my comments, they're often mischaracterized or exaggerated. What we have done to counter that is I have implemented these teams to go unannounced. In cases such as that, in some facilities, I've even dispatched high-level assistant directors unannounced to put their eyes on these things because we take them very seriously. I absolutely don't expect that to occur in one of our facilities. There is ample soap and water. There is ample supplies. There's ample feminine hygiene products. I will also say this. There are times when my dispenser has been out of items, and I always remind people that they just need to ask for them. So I've heard those things, Congresswoman. I agree they're unacceptable, but I don't believe that to the level where people didn't have them.
Okay, you're familiar with the camp, correct? The facility called the camp?
Yes, ma'am, I am. I was regional director in that region. I have visited that facility. I'm very familiar with it.
So is it true that 34 out of 50 inmates tested positive?
Congresswoman, I don't have the information for that exact facility, but I have no reason to doubt your numbers, especially if you got them off our website, which are updated daily. We have had outbreaks at different places. I know Danbury was affected early on, so it's very possible, but I do not know and cannot confirm those exact numbers. I'll certainly follow up with you.
Well, a couple things I want followed up on as well. The COVID positive women allegedly were placed in a men's visiting room and did not receive the over-counter medication to assist with fevers and body aches. Not only were the women forced to sleep under brutal circumstances, they were not provided the basic necessities to treat these symptoms. I need to know, because I have visited prisons and I have been told that because of the budget, that each facility is given the same budget. And so because female products cost more, women are not given the adequate amount. And I would appreciate, so in this report, and I will get you the report in case you haven't seen it, a pregnant inmate shared a story of a bunkmate who had developed a cough. Yet the prison bureau was not able to quickly respond with testing, living in these populated conditions. Were pregnant inmates granted priority status for consideration of home confinement?
Congresswoman, first of all, I would like to follow up with you to get that information because if that occurred, I want to know about it. It's the first I've heard about it. I will answer your other question. Yes, they were. When pregnant females, when COVID hit, as we learned more about it, we made sure that we had ample space in our RRCs and our programs to get them out as quickly as possible. Again, taking into account that I still have to follow the rules and the law and public safety. So at current time, there's only 15 pregnant females in the Bureau of Prisons. 7 of them are in custody in our facilities. And it's because they don't meet the criteria to go out to the community. Otherwise, I would have already placed them there. So yes, they are given ample consideration. We do everything possible to get them into community placement.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
I thank you, Congresswoman. We're going to start a second round. We will be called to votes probably within 20 or so minutes. So we'll get as much of the second round in as we can before we go to vote. I'll recognize myself for another 5 minutes of questions. Director, I became a congressman in January of 2013. In February of 2013, Eric Williams was killed. He was a correctional officer, 34 years old, at USP Canaan in Wayne County, Pennsylvania. He was patrolling on his own in USP Canaan, and he was jumped by a vicious, violent criminal by the name of Jesse Kanui. Kanui jumped him. He had a shiv. He stabbed Eric Williams over 200 times, and Eric Williams died. I dare say you have got to know Don Williams, Eric's father, since then, and you're very familiar with this whole story. But it happened in my backyard when I was a brand new congressman, and it shocked me that Eric Williams was made to patrol on his own, and there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that if he had had a partner patrolling with him, that never would have happened. And so this question of augmentation of using statistics to talk about the correctional officer to inmate ratio has come up, and it's been a thorn in the side of the whole system the whole time that I've been in Congress. You mentioned it. You mentioned your commitment at the top of this hearing. You mentioned your commitment to increasing that correctional officer to inmate ratio, which is clearly the answer for tragedies like that. Would you tell us exactly what you have in mind? What is your plan? And how can we be assured that you're not going to include psychologists and art teachers in your statistics?
Thank you, Chairman. I am very familiar with the Eric Williams story, and I've certainly had the honor to meet Mr. Williams and get to know him when I was a regional director up there. I was a warden in a high security penitentiary when that happened, and it certainly hits home. So that stuff bothers me. And I will tell you that when I told you that we're working on this, I'm absolutely committed to addressing those issues. Now, I have to explain, and I'm sure you've heard this because I know you're very familiar with the facility and with the agency, but augmentation has always been a part and always will be of the Bureau of Prisons. We're all correctional workers. That's what allows us to actually function in times like COVID. The key there is the over-reliance. That's what I'm committed to making sure we get rid of. And I certainly agree with you, Congressman, that using other staff at correctional posts is not a good idea when we over-rely on it. So we have started a hiring initiative. I mentioned that. 100% of staffing. We're committed to doing that. What makes that difference? I know it sounds like it should be common sense, but what makes that difference is we did something different. I shut down all internal selections. Now, that came with some scrutiny, obviously. I'm holding people's promotions up, but we can't have it both ways. I want to focus all resources to fill those 100% vacancies, okay? So obviously more staff in those units, those prisons makes us safer. That's the number one commitment. The other thing we're willing to do, and we've started doing, and you may have seen it in the GAO audit, was that we've been scrutinized for how we staff our facilities. So I'm taking advantage of this time with our capacity low, and we're reviewing our capacity of each facility, and we're making sure that we have the appropriate number of staff at each facility by security level, by mission, by operation, to make sure that we can adequately program, but keep people safe. And that sounds very basic, but it's difficult to do. Our staffing guidelines are somewhat antiquated. It's time to modernize them, and we've begun that process. So my commitment going forward, Chairman, is that we're going to do everything possible to make sure that incidents like that don't happen again, and that we put the appropriate number of staff. I look forward to working with the department, and we appreciate the support from this committee in providing us those resources.
Well, it's not just for the protection of the correctional officers, it's also for the safety of the inmates. What I will ask you is, will you make a commitment to share with me and this committee, this subcommittee, the actual CO numbers, leaving out all of the other non-correctional officers, share those CO numbers as compared to the inmate population?
Okay, so right now, Congressman, I told you we have a little over 37. I'm going to talk in approximates because these numbers
No,
change.
I don't mean right now. I mean,
Oh, yes.
every couple of months moving forward so we can all work together on the project.
Absolutely, sir. Right now, we have about 13,500 correctional officers, 1,200 vacancies specifically that we're working on. So yes, I will share them.
Thank you. And I'm going to recognize Ranking Member Adderholt for 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Director, I know that the Bureau of Prisons contract operated facilities offer a wide range of programs to serve their inmates, many of which have been made a priority under the First Step Act and that have demonstrated that they reduce recidivism. These include literacy programs, job training, residential drug abuse programs, anger management, and mental health treatment. My question is, can the Bureau of Prisons guarantee that no inmates' programs or treatments will be interrupted or won't be discontinued or diminished as a result of complying with the executive order that I mentioned about with the closures?
Congressman, if I understand and I heard you correctly, I can't guarantee that, sir, not for the reasons you said, though. In the normal course of running a prison, we often run into issues where we have to stop programming. And as I stated earlier, through COVID was an example where we have crisis and it does affect it. What I can do is commit to you, though, that we are going to implement the First Step Back and make sure that inmates have all the available resources to earn those time credits and to get those opportunities. That's half of our mission. Everybody thinks that we just keep them in. Well, the safety security is half of our mission, but the reentry and providing those programs is just as important. So we're committed to doing that. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So there could be some programs or treatments that would be interrupted if this executive order, when it's put into place.
No, sir, I can't directly relate it to the executive order because I don't believe, if I'm understanding your question, that doesn't have anything to do with the ability of us to provide programs.
Yeah, well, I guess my question is that if they have to be transferred, then there will be interruption with some of these programs. And so that's what I was referring to.
Okay, yes, sir. I understand now. Yes, sir. Obviously, in the course of any transfers, we do interrupt programming. One of the things that we are trying to do to mitigate that going forward across the board is to make sure that we have consistent programming throughout so that if an inmate transfers from one location to another, that he can resume his programming at the other place. And we try to do that as much as possible. Our goal is for them to successfully complete programs. So that is always viewed. We've even made adjustments so that an inmate could finish a program because that's our goal, is to get them to complete these programs.
Yeah. Okay. And bear in mind, I understand that, I think there is a role for private prisons, just like there is a role, but we also need to have the Bureau running prisons. So I understand there's a partnership there where there's a room for both. And but it's not uncommon, as you know, to hear people say that contract operated facilities are less safe than Bureau of Prisons managed facilities. But isn't it true that the 2016 Office of Inspector General report on Bureau of Prison monitoring contract prisons showed that privately managed facilities that they audited and performed better in several key categories, including fewer suicides, fewer positive drug tests, fewer drug confiscation, less inmate sexual misconduct, and just overall grievances. Is that correct?
Congressman, I am familiar with what you're talking about. First thing I'd like to point out is that as silly as it sounds, it's like comparing apples and oranges. The inmates that we place in the privates are low security criminal alien population with not a lot of disciplinary on them. They have short sentences. They're waiting deportation in many cases. So they don't get a lot of our serious offenders. We keep those ourselves. And I will tell you also that we follow the guidance given, sir. We're required to follow the executive order. I will tell you that we have worked well with the privates. As you mentioned, partner, I will say that we rely on them. We have in the past. So it's not my position to talk about whether or not they perform better or not. I will tell you this: they've met their contracts, and that means that they've performed with what we expect them to do within the statement of work. So with that said, sir, we have to follow the executive orders. And that's the best I can tell you on that. But it isn't any decision made because we don't think they're performing. I'm just doing what I'm told to do.
Yeah, but the bottom line is you don't believe that contract facilities that you oversee are unsafe.
If I believe that the contract facilities are unsafe, was that the question, sir? I want to make sure I understood.
I'm saying you don't believe that any facilities that you're contracted with, that you oversee, that they're unsafe places for the prisoners. Is that correct?
No, sir, I don't believe that, and they're meeting their obligations, or we wouldn't utilize them. They have to meet the standards, or we won't use them.
Yes, sir. That was my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Congressman Ed Case for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Director, I'm still stuck on my prior line of questioning and trying to understand that a little bit further, just so I can try to isolate what the actual issues are. You previously said that roughly half of the correctional officers had, thus far at least, declined to be vaccinated, even though, as I understand it, the vaccine, the 80,000 doses that you testified were made available first to the correctional officers. Is that right, first of all?
Yes, Congressman, with one exception, they're made available to all of our staff. 100% of our staff, unless they were on leave or something, it's been made available. And for those who weren't available, they can request it at this point.
Okay, understood. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that you could have had, with the available vaccinations to date, you could have had 100% in your officers if they had decided to all take it, right?
I don't know, Congressman. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that, the simple math, but, keep in mind that we have all staff, we have about 13,000 correctional officers, but I'm talking about all of our staff, the 37,000 that have been offered. Certainly if they accept it, we very well may be at 100%.
Yeah. Well, I'm just taking 37,000 and timesing it by 2. That's less than the 80,000. So I'm just we don't have to get into the exactness of this. I'm just saying that, in my understanding, virtually all of your correctional officers could have been vaccinated to date and yet didn't. And so your answer when I asked you why not was you said, can they be compelled to do it? You said, A, the interpretation of FDA emergency versus permanent approval, and B, you made mention of the collective bargaining agreements. So let me just tick off the collective bargaining agreement side of it for these purposes. Have there been discussions with the representatives of the collective bargaining units for the correctional officers about taking the vaccine? Is that a subject of negotiation right now, or are there conditions being placed on whether officers will or won't take it? For example, is there a disagreement over hazard pay or something like that?
No, Congressman, if I'm understanding your question, the answer to that is no. Now, I will tell you that we have had informal discussions. We have an open line of communication with the union, but at this point, we have not approached them formally because, as I stated earlier, sir, I listen to the experts, and that's in the case of the vaccinations, what my medical director tells me and his staff, and of course the legal side of the house, and then there's the labor side. We have informally discussed this with the national union executives. We have informally, though. we haven't done any formal type of approach, but we're in constant discussion with them.
Okay, so at this point, it seems that whether we like it or not, we're in a voluntary situation, and voluntarily, you could have those discussions with the collective bargaining union representatives. But let me cover the other side of this equation. Do you have the sense what is your sense of why half of the correctional officers have not been vaccinated? That's much, much higher than any sense I have of the general population in terms of, would you take it if you could? My understanding is that's somewhere around 3/4, give or take. In any event, it doesn't matter. It's 50% versus higher, I think you would say, for the general. So I'm asking the question, why do you think that is? What kind of information are they being given about the benefits of vaccinations, especially in the context of their work environment, where it is absolutely tangibly a risk, to themselves and to their fellow officers and to the folks in those institutions. Why do you think that they're not taking this in higher numbers? And what do you think you can do about it?
Well, Congressman, what I can do about it is what we've continued to do is that we absolutely encourage it. We set the example. Most of our leaders were the first to take it. And a lot of times, again, to go back to our relationship with the union, our union leadership has partnered with us to make that example and encourage the staff.
Have you distributed information to all correctional officers saying this is the objective science, public health recommendations of taking a vaccination? This is the reality. Is that out there in the field?
Yes, it is, Congressman. And I will tell you, I've also done video messages. We encourage it at every level to encourage them to take the vaccine. The one question that I can't answer, sir, is what I think about it, because it would be purely my opinion, and that's irrelevant here, because I can't make a determination for someone to make a personal choice whether or not they're going to be vaccinated. And certainly I have an opinion on that, but I don't think it's appropriate to share it. I'll just tell you that I respect that of someone making that choice, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Director. I would suggest that perhaps you can ask them to understand if you haven't already, some systematic asking of them doesn't violate their privacy. They can answer or not.
Yes, sir.
All right, we are now going to move to Mr. Palazzo for questions, and I would ask that Congressman Palazzo keep to 3 minutes so we can get through the remaining members before we have impending votes and we don't have to adjourn and try to come back. Remember, all members can submit written questions that will be transmitted to the witness and will be expected to be answered. The chair recognizes Mr. Palazzo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may be like some of the other members on this call. A lot of this is new to me, so I appreciate the director's patience with us and helping to explain, and provide answers to our questions. Just sitting on the call, I started having other questions. Why were private prisons? What's the history behind the private prisons? Why did what brought them into creation? And do they specialize in a certain class like the criminal aliens? Can you provide some context, please?
Yes, Congressman, I would be probably stretching it if I told you I knew the history of why we use them. I will tell you what I know from the last part of my career, or when we started using them, or if there was mandates. I don't know the answer to those questions. What I will tell you is that we have partnered with them when at the peak of our population, when we were at 220,000, we absolutely needed their bed space, and that's how this was utilized. That's why they maintain, and we tend to send them the criminal aliens. They're usually 150-month sentence or less. They're not in for violent crimes at times like that. That's who we place in those prisons, and then we keep the people that we need to manage on our side. But that's the best I can do to tell you that we relied on their bed space at one point. We just don't need it now.
All right. How many people are actually in private prisons? How many inmates, federal prisons?
Today, sir, about 13,000 or so. Again, the number changes daily.
In these private facilities, were they constructed with private dollars, or is these dollars that the federal government provide? What will happen to those facilities if the contracts are not extended? And what also will happen with the prisoners? Well, where will they go?
Okay, Congressman. So the inmates, obviously, we will take back into our custody and spread them out through our capacity as appropriate. As far as answering what happens to the prisons, number one, there's only one prison that we own that was a private, and we took it back over when we closed it down for structural reasons. That was Taft. So that is in our inventory. That's our facility. As far as all the other facilities, the 10 that we currently have, they belong to the private, sir, and I can't answer what they'll be used for. You would have to ask the vendors about that, but they're not our facilities. We just pay them to house our inmates.
Okay, I do appreciate that. And I know the government from time to time identifies things to privatize because sometimes they can save the taxpayer dollars, and in these tight and soon to be even tighter fiscal times, we need to make sure that we're keeping cost low and quality of services high. So again, Director, thank you very much.
Thank you. And the chair recognizes Mr. Rupersberger for 3 minutes.
Hello? Okay, can you hear me? I'm on my, okay, great, got it. Showtime. I want to get back to the question of safety standards in prison. High rates of pre-existing respiratory and cardiac conditions are factors that can exacerbate the spread of COVID-19 among the 2+ million people incarcerated in American jails, prisons, and correctional facilities. Now, policies that have potential to curb the spread of the disease include the early release of prisoners, unlikely to pose a risk of reoffending, implementing strong infection control practices, and using widespread testing. Now, health and safety standards in prison is the key to maintaining health and prison population, and also health staff in the prisons. In Baltimore, part of my district, a class action lawsuit has been filed over the rapid rate of infection, and prisoners are saying they're not being kept safe nor given the cleaning products necessary to keep themselves safe. So I have two questions, basically. How many of your facilities do you believe meet standards for safe ventilation? And secondly, is your medical staffing and standards of medical care for residents merit all the current needs where there is likely to be continued gaps in services? And if not, what are those needs?
Congressman, I think the easy answer to tell you is that yes, we abide by the standards. You know, we undergo ACA accreditation. That's a third party who comes in and looks at us. It's a very stringent process. We have our own internal processes. We have the OIG and the GAO who are always reviewing our facilities. And as far as the medical standards and processes, we have, again, accreditations that they go through. And certainly we deal with the CDC, other public health organizations like that. So to answer your question, if we aren't up to standard, we are pretty much told by someone, or we figure it out on our own. To date, right now, yes, we're up to standard, sir. We take that very serious. In fact, it's something that we commit to doing, to making sure we're running a safe environment. As far as, again, the ability for someone to have the safety net inside the prison, when we know about these things, we certainly look into them. I've heard of many of these allegations, and I assure you, before I became director, there was no such thing as unannounced inspections. And I have done many of them. In fact, most all of our facilities have undergone inspections for the reason you said, to ensure we're doing what we're supposed to.
All right, it's still my crawl from the last questioning. The fact that you have prison guards that refuse to take a test, and you don't have the authority to say that's part of your employment, when in fact, by not taking a test, these prison guards can infect, prisoners who have to be in that prison from COVID. to me, that's very difficult, and we've got to find a way to work around it. For whatever reasons they have for not taking the test, we cannot allow that point of view to affect the health, safety, and welfare of those prisoners. And that really, we've got to focus on that again. I'm just bringing it up for emphasis. I yield back.
The emphasis is noted and appreciated. And the chair recognizes Congressman Ben Klein for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I wanted to ask about the majority of BOP inmates in contractor operated facilities who are sentenced criminal aliens. What is happening to them upon the closure of these facilities? Are they just being, is there any effort to, after they're finished with their sentence, deport them, or what kind of considerations being given to where they're being transferred?
Yes, Congressman, very good question. The determination of whether or not they be deported is ICE makes that determination. We have an immigration hearing program. We have, I believe, 24 sites. We work in close coordination with ICE. They hold those hearings. They make the actual determination of whether or not to deport somebody. To answer the first part of your question, those inmates currently in the privates that are closing, they will be absorbed back into our facilities. We'll do our best to keep them and certainly in the areas somewhat where they were, but it'll be on bed space availability and the needs of the agency, though.
All right. Can you outline for me, going back to my original questions about home confinement, some of the factors that you consider as you determine whether to send to home confinement?
Yes, sir, I can. There's a bit of a list here, so please cut me off if you think I'm going to.
Is severity of the offense one
yes.
of the?
There's 4 hard criteria, Congressman. The easiest thing to tell you is that you cannot have a primary offense of violence, a sex offense, a terrorism, or have a detainer. Those are non-discretionary. If you fit into one of those categories, we're not putting you out because public safety is also in there. We take that very serious.
Prior record?
Sir?
Is prior record considered?
Prior record, yes, sir. Well, disciplinary history inside is looked at. But there's several other, I call them discretionary because we have looked at those and we have a committee at times that review them and we make sure that we are maximizing the use, keeping in fact public health, public safety, as well as the inmate safety.
What about immigration status? Is that?
Oh, absolutely, sir. If you have a detainer, you can't go out on home confinement.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I don't have any other questions. I appreciate your help with that.
Sure. One follow-up from Mr. Klein's question. He mentioned prior record. I think what he meant was, suppose you're in for a nonviolent marijuana offense, but in the past you have had a violent offense on your rap sheet that you got convicted of. Is that considered?
Congressman, the answer to that is yes, because we look at each individual and we assess them in totality of the circumstance. All of that's taken into consideration. In those cases where something like that, we would reach out through the Department of Justice to the United States Attorney's Office and get their input. Maybe something to follow up on to see what type of crime it was or if it fits that. But yes, it is looked at and is taken into consideration. The U.S. Attorney's Office also has the ability to provide us information on objective to that of whether or not they support us releasing that individual.
Very good. Thank you. Recognize Mr. Trone for 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's talk about the First Step Act. This was a step in the right direction, totally bipartisan. Very good work done by Congress and the President. And in fiscal 20, Congress included $75 million funding to begin implementation. In fiscal 21, we included $400 million to begin to move forward in implementation. Part of the First Step Act implementation required an independent review commission to do a report. That report came out just recently in December. The report found, and I quote, even a full return to pre-COVID BOP programming levels will not be sufficient to make available the quote, evidence-based recidivism reduction programs and productive activities for all eligible prisoners in Bureau custody by January 22, when it was required by the FSA legislation. The Bureau will require significant additional appropriations in order to muster the personnel and programming access necessary to achieve that goal. So what kind of programming and how much additional funding will be required for all eligible prisoners in the Bureau's custody to access some really good things: occupational training, educational classes, behavioral therapy, drug treatment, that are all required by the FSA.
Yes, Congressman, thank you. For first, we certainly appreciate the $409 million provided by this committee in our budget, and we are going to put it to good use. With some of the things you mentioned, we have over 80 evidence-based recidivism reducing programs and productive activities. Even through COVID, even though it did hinder our ability, we still had 51,000 inmates enrolled in those programs and productive activities, and over 21,000 of them had a completion. So I read the report, sir. I was a little bit shocked about the IRC's recommendation because we work closely with them. We are expanding capacity. We are utilizing the funds provided by Congress to ensure that we hire up. That's part of our hiring. A lot of those were First Step Act positions specific to expand the programs you mentioned, vocational tech, career technical education, things of that nature.
Okay. Yeah, we're running out of time, but quickly, could you get back to us with your office in writing? We've got 9 months to get this completed as the First Step Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation required. And the IRC said it will not happen at the current rate. So we like to know how it's going to happen in the next 9 months. And if it's not, what you need so we can help you implement the First Step Act as Congress and President Trump initiated. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We look forward to working with the department to ensure that we have the resources to implement it. We're committed to making this happen, Congressman, I assure you.
All right, the chair recognizes Mr. Garcia for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Carvajal, thanks again. I empathize with you and for you sitting in a body of legislators asking you why you're not mandating a regulation that you have no control over. That seems like it would either come out of the legislative branch or an executive order of some sort. I don't support mandatory vaccines as a qualification to work in any capacity. But I also think it's rational that if that path is taken, it should be directed from the federal government and not up to individual directors within federal agencies. So I apologize for the many questions on that to you. I'd like to ask for 2 pieces of data if we can get submitted to the record. The first is to my first question earlier, a metric of percentage of death rate within both the privately operated and also BOP operated facilities. And then the second, if we can get a count of victim deaths as a result of early release prisoners in the midst of the pandemic. I think those 2 metrics I know are not in front of you, but should be attainable. If we can get those added to the record as part of your testimony, that would be fantastic. Does that sound doable?
Yes, Congressman, I'm not sure what it would take to get those, but I will certainly follow up and with your office and let you know that we can either provide them to you or why we cannot.
Thank you, sir. And then I'll just end with a question. How is correction officer and staff retention and recruiting right now? And if it's suffering or depressed in any way, what can we in this body here, especially in this subcommittee, do to help you attract and retain talent?
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman, because that's one of our biggest challenges. That's what we're doing with our hiring initiative. As you know, I mentioned staff retention also. I'm happy to say that even through COVID last year, as tough as that was, we hired over 3,800 staff. But we lost as many. So again, the balance out. So we're working on retention and we're trying to do things to improve safety and make sure that staff know we're committed to doing that. I think, Congressman, the biggest thing that we could get from this body and really all of the members of Congress is positive support. Certainly people that live in your constituency, tell them we're hiring. Tell them we're hiring. I have jobs available. I see millions of people out of work and we are hiring right now. And we have great jobs and it's a great way to public service. And our slogan, come work on the inside. That's what we can use from you. We appreciate the resources that this committee's provided. We certainly put them to good use, but I think helping us positive message in the community that we're not a broken organization. We certainly can use improvement. I'm committed to doing that. But we have jobs available right now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I'm committed to supporting you in that effort as well. I yield back.
Thank you. And members, that concludes our second round, and we're going to stop there. And I'm going to remind all the members that we have provided you an email address, which you can use to submit written questions to Director Carvajal, and he has evidenced a willingness to go ahead and answer those. And Director Carvajal, we're going to take your promises at face value, and in that light and in that spirit, look forward to working with you to keep us posted. We need to know these answers to properly fund the Bureau of Prisons and make sure you have the tools that you need to carry out your mission in an ethical, a humane, and a practical way that the American people expect. So thank you for joining us. This is the end of the hearing. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you all very much.